Good evening. Great to see you again. I'm Panasya Singhavatana, an Assistant Manager of Sachin Sustainability and Entrepreneurship Center. Our topic today will be exciting for the sleepyheads in the audience, as our Fireside Chat speaker is the CEO of STEP Social Enterprise, Kun Max Simpson. STEP models a range of inclusive social business, including coffee shops and zero-waste shops. It also runs a UK-accredited vocational training center which prepares people with learning difficulties transition to better employment opportunities. And please welcome our moderator, Dr. Vipapan Adunjaran and Kun Pornmachi Sangmani. Both beautiful ladies are our project manager of SEC. Again, please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A feature of the Zoom webinar or in the chat box in the Facebook live stream. Thank you.
Hello, thank you, Kun Panasya. And hello, Max. So today we're gonna have the Fireside Chat in the topic of a stepping stone process for organization to become inclusive employer. Okay, so we would like to first starting that. Could you please introduce about your background a little bit?
Hi, good evening, everybody. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, is it showing?
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, I'm Max. I'm the CEO and founder of STEPS. I'm originally from the UK and I've been in Thailand for around 10 years. I was working in an international school for 5 years before seeing that there was a gap between education and employment for the neurodivergent population and wanted to find a solution to help change the outcomes for that community. So left working at the school and was fortunate enough to find a Thai co-founder, Kun Uang, who has a son with autism. So felt very passionate about trying to do something for this community as well. And together we started STEPS about 5 years ago.
That's very cool. And I wonder that how did you come up with the STEPS Social Enterprise?
So we knew that we needed to change the outcomes for this community. So we were looking at different ways to provide access to work experience, whilst also giving society the opportunity to see that this community is capable and change perceptions. As some of you probably already know, the perceptions around disability in Thailand are still quite negative and there's like not very much awareness. So we thought it was important to create a platform where people could come together. So we decided to open a coffee shop as the first type of model so that our trainees would have the opportunity to gain transferable skills and the community would have the opportunity to come in and see that neurodivergent people can be value adding.
I think that's a good idea, and it's very just like the open opportunities to like use or disabilities use. And could you please give more detail about the process of organizations to become inclusive employers?
Okay, so I will give a little bit more detail about the background of STEPS. So our mission is about providing work skills, as you mentioned, and preparing people for employment. We use the social enterprise as a platform to model inclusive and impactful and sustainable business. At the same time, they demonstrate employment equality, and we're working towards creating a solution for the 500,000 people with disabilities in Thailand who are unemployed but willing and able to work. Just before I go into a bit more detail, we always like to share this when we're talking about STEPS, about the type of language we use and why. It's really powerful for people to take away. So when we talk about, if we say terms like disabled people or learning difference person, it kind of defines a person as only that. So we try to switch the language to be person first. So we talk about people with disabilities, neurodivergent person, neurotypical person, rather than putting a label on them first. So throughout this, you will hear me use the word neurodivergent a lot. This is a newer term that's very widely accepted in the community because it's not saying that somebody is less, it's just highlighting the difference is good. So the model began because we knew that not just in Thailand, but globally, there is really sort of low statistics around employment for the disabled population all over the world. So globally, it's not great. And there's lots and lots of business cases that would demonstrate that if countries were able to find meaningful employment for this community, we could see an increase of 1 to 7% of the GDP, and that's just in ASEAN alone. In other countries, it's slightly higher. In Thailand itself, as I mentioned, we're talking about around 500,000 people. So we see here that around 36% of people with disabilities are employed. That's out of 2 million, and that's out of the people who are registered. So we are aware that that number is actually a lot higher, but there's a lot of stigma attached to going to register and get a card that says you're a disabled person. Within that 36%, the vast majority of those employed are in the agriculture sector. So that's often not an employment choice, it's just through family that's a job that somebody has to do. And we're really focused on this number, those that could be employed but remain unemployed. So our model covers 3 areas. So we're talking about education. So part of the challenge we find in Thailand is that the Education for All Act is not followed. So all children, regardless of race, age, background, disability, should have access to education for free until age 15. However, what is usually found is that after primary school, the vast majority of children with disabilities don't continue into secondary education, mostly because schools aren't willing to accept them because they feel like they don't have the resources and means to support them. So, of course, we understand if you don't have the means and resources, that's really difficult for a school to know how to support that, but this support should be being put in place by the government. Similarly, there's a lack of appropriate curriculum and there's a lack of trained teachers and specialists. So this sort of comes together to make education not always a very enjoyable experience for our community. So when we have adults coming to us at steps who tend to be 18 plus, they're really low self-esteem and confidence because they haven't had a good time previously in education and have been assumed to be incapable and not be able to achieve anything. We then look at the workplace. So employers and employees tend to be quite unfamiliar and uncomfortable with disability in general. That's regardless of the size of company that we work with. And it's takes quite a lot of time to change those attitudes. We've worked with small little companies who just have a handful of staff to companies of thousands of employees. And we find the same problems throughout. So you've got big companies with teams that don't want to have people with disabilities on their team because they feel like they won't meet their quota of their KPIs or any of their targets. And then you get HR departments who feel pretty negative because they feel like they're always the department that has to hire this community. There's a quota system in Thailand that means every company with 100 employees should hire 1 person with a disability. If you don't want to hire, you can choose to pay a fine, which is the equivalent of minimum wage salary. The vast majority of companies do that, which is understandable because there's very little incentive in place for them to do anything else. And even if they do want to do it, there's almost no support to enable them to do that. And they're not sure where to hire people with disabilities from. And then because of the education issue, because there's a lack of an inclusive education model, there does tend to be a skills gap where people with disabilities don't have the same skills as neurotypical people because they haven't had the same access to education in the first place. So only around 2% of companies who have to fulfill the quota actually employ directly. The rest have either pay the fine or you can go via another method which allows you to hire somebody and have them on under your quota, but they can work somewhere else. So quite a few companies choose to do that too. And then society in general. So when we look at societal impacts on disability, one of the big things we look at is the media. Disability is almost always portrayed as charity. It's something we look down upon. We feel sorry for these people. You know, you have sympathy, and this doesn't help change the narrative. And in addition to that, as we all walk around the streets, it's hard for lots of people to navigate day to day, let alone somebody who may have a physical challenge. So buildings and systems have not been designed thinking of people who need additional support. And it's with that sort of notion in mind of disability being seen as charity why we were very passionate about being a social enterprise instead. Lots of people in the early stages came to us and said, well, why are you not registering as a foundation? It will be much easier for people to help you. But we don't want people to help us. We want people to see this as sustainable business and something that you could also go and do yourself. The whole idea is to model different types of business and empower other people. But if we went down the foundation route, yes, we would probably have access to more funding, but we wouldn't be changing the narrative. We'd be keeping disabled people or people with disabilities even trapped under that narrative. So the STEPS model, what we have to date is we have 7 coffee shops and 3 vocational training centers, 2 therapy centers, 2 retail shops, and 2 business service centers. So we're working around providing access to appropriate education, modeling these inclusive and sustainable businesses, and supporting and empowering employers to be inclusion champions. So the coffee shops are great because they provide this platform to interact with the community, as I mentioned earlier. COVID's made them really fun to run, which we'll touch on a little bit later. But they really help bridge the gap, I think, for society. So whilst not all of our trainees want to work in hospitality, they recognize that they can practice transferable skills there. So being on time, dealing with problems, interacting with your colleagues, conflict resolution, these are things we all have to know how to do in our daily jobs, regardless of the industry we're in. So this presents all these different types of opportunities. So you'll enter into a STEPS branch and you will see trainees doing everything from working the till, taking orders, making drinks, working in the kitchen, counting stock. And then if you go upstairs into the training center, that sort of feeling is replicated with trainees supporting to do HR and admin work, supporting with accounts, digitizing documents for us. The whole business runs because we are inclusive, and we have to practice what we preach. And this is very important, again, in the beginning when I was going out to meet with employers, asking them to hire people with disabilities. It gave us a lot more strength to be able to say, well, we do it also. And here's testimonials and training and support and resources from our own model where we've done it. Because whilst we do have a team of specialists in our training center, our coffee shops, the staff that work there are everyday people who've never had any exposure to this community. So their inputs and their experience has been really valuable. And this is then empowering for other employers to hear, and they're more open to working with us, knowing that we do it in our own life too.
Yeah. And Max, may I ask one question? As you mentioned that the trainees can select the back office and front office operations. They will rotate the roles, or they can select which one they prefer to get training.
Okay, so when a trainee first starts with us, in their first 4 weeks, they will get the opportunity to try all the different types of paths that we have. Unless they are very clear already on what they want to do, then they will start immediately on that pathway. But in those first 4 weeks, it's a fact-finding mission for us. It helps the trainee to settle in, find the type of work that they might enjoy, and then we can help connect that with employment. And during that first initial period, we are also doing a range of assessments that look at things like occupational preference. So do you prefer working indoors or outdoors, with people or with ideas, with creative concepts or with concrete concepts, to help build a profile of what sort of job in what sort of environment that person would like to be in.
As you mentioned earlier about your model on your business, that you focus on education, employment, and society. And from your perspective, how your business relate or respond to the Sustainability Development Goals, or SDG?
Yeah. Okay, so we mostly focus around quality education. This is where our training center comes in. So we take a curriculum from the UK, and we are a registered center. So the program is bilingual, and all the trainees have the opportunity to gain qualifications and certificates, which is really important, as many of them have not had the opportunity to achieve something before. So this is a big part of the goal that we work towards. Decent work and economic growth. It's offering employment opportunities. We're helping people to achieve meaningful and sustainable employment. Industry, innovation and infrastructure. So we're also promoting this concept of inclusive and sustainable industry. We're reducing inequalities. This is where the social enterprises really kick in, and they provide this place to enable people to access appropriate education and build self-esteem and confidence and be part of the community. And then sustainable cities and communities. So we're working on this whole concept of creating an inclusive society, and how to create models that can be replicated and scaled outside of our own abilities.
Okay, we can see that your business can respond to many goals of sustainable development goal. And how could you know that your business is really contribute something very good to the society? Have you ever measured or have any evaluations for your business impact?
Yeah, so what I can show you is about our business service center, and then it will lead into the impact that we are able to measure. The trainees, as they're going through their program, as we mentioned, they get the opportunity to try different types of work. At a certain stage in the program, they begin to do internal and external internships. Internally, that might be at one of our 7 coffee shops or in our business service center. And then externally, that would be one of our employment partners. So we have around 20 companies who we've vetted and we've done different levels of training for, and they're familiar with how to support the neurodivergent community in the workplace. So they cover a different range of industries, from food and beverage at places like the Commons and Roots, and hotels like the Rembrandt and the Hyatt, all the way through to organizations like Shopee, who are offering digital type of work. Then we work with those employers to create jobs and change systems and processes that enable people to enter and join the organization. Now, one of the initial stages of that process is some companies want to begin the process by outsourcing work to us. So this is what we think of as step 1 in the stepping stone model. Companies have a need. They also want to be inclusive. They're not quite sure how to do it. So they will send different types of work off-site for us to do at our center, where we've got a team of specialists that know how to take the work, put it into a system. We break down the task into smaller chunks. We build a task force of people of different neurodivergencies together, and build up their ability to be able to do the work. And then the work goes back to the company. They get to see that the work's been done to a good level, and the quality of the work and the timeliness is everything that they needed. And then they get to start to feel good about themselves, actually, that they're part of something that's meaningful and not just putting this process through the normal organization. So we do different types of back office work, including digitization of files and transferring of file types. And at the moment, we're expanding into other areas at the moment, which we're getting training on how to do this. So web scrapping is quite interesting, as is database cleaning. These are requests that we've had from companies to do these types of tasks. So they're helping us to build out these skills. And the demand originally came from, we know that companies have especially in the city, they want to reduce storage costs. They need to keep some certain types of documents for up to 7 years through regulations from the revenue department or because of HR regulations. So sometimes it's, thousands upon thousands of files stored at a high rent location in the city. There's an increased desire to have all of our data be online. So they want all of their documents digitizing and putting on the cloud. This helped to create quite a lot of demand for the service. And then in turn, because we are doing it quickly and reliably, the communication is good. As I mentioned, they feel good about the service because they get to work with an inclusive community. They will move into the next stage and look at how that this might be able to move on site. So during that process, when we're looking at our impact, we're tracking different types of metrics. So we're looking at the numbers of hours of training that our trainees receive, and then the numbers of hours of employment that they might have. At the same time, we have four actually in-house built tools that have been built by our team of specialists that are tracking our trainees' employability skills, so their work readiness. So they do this when they first join us, and then again at 6 months. The same with their life skills. So we do a lot of work around using transport, managing money. I also need help with this. How to budget properly, how to open a bank account, or all of these sort of skills that maybe some of us take for granted. And then we're also measuring self-esteem. So for our community, we know there's a big correlation between self-esteem and ability to be sustainably employed. I think that's quite true for the neurotypical population also. When we feel good about ourselves, we're better at everything that we do. This is particularly important for our community where they generally don't have great self-esteem in the first place. So we are measuring this every 3 months. So these are indicators from the trainee side and how the program is supporting their own personal development. And then from our client side, so for the Business Service Centre particularly, we are measuring that we complete things in a timely manner and the number of correct files that we've digitized or added to the database. So some of them have systems that give us a percentage score each time that we upload to their database. We know that we're helping our clients to create an inclusive supply chain. Part of that is working with even their PR and marketing teams to share what they're doing and the right language with the rest of their employees, because sometimes we are only working with 1 or 2 departments. We get feedback from the organization that perceptions are starting to change. We do some data collection from the organizations where at the beginning of the process, we will do an assessment to see the awareness of disability in the organization. So we know that for a lot of people, they haven't met somebody before who is neurodivergent, or we can all think about the first time maybe that we met somebody who is in a wheelchair, and maybe it makes us feel uncomfortable because we're not sure what to do or how to act. So trying to help people overcome this uncomfortableness is quite important so they can start to see somebody as a person that can add value. So we collect data around their existing knowledge of disability at the beginning, and then we do it again later on as they've started to see that, oh, wow, this person can do that job really well, and wow, they can, oh, they're so accurate when they do it. Maybe they do it better than I do. That's interesting. I didn't expect that. And then it helps the organization to start think about, okay, maybe they could do this, and maybe this job would be suitable for them. So we are tracking these sort of impact measurements all the time, a mixture of qualitative and quantitative, but together it helps to build this sort of case study for each type of business model we have around the impactfulness and whether it's sustainable, and secondly, whether it's scalable, which is always important for us.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's really I think that this impact criteria is very quite useful for, for other the social enterprise as well. Yeah.
Yeah, it was
Okay.
tricky in the early stages because we work with relatively low numbers of what would traditionally be called beneficiaries, even though we don't call them that ourselves. So we are looking at maybe 50 adults per year. So when it comes to impact measurement, you know, when you compare yourselves to big organizations who are talking about thousands of children that they supported that year, and it makes you feel inadequate in what you're doing. But we were lucky to work with a very successful impact consultant who worked with around, I think vetted 4,000 different social enterprises around the globe, and really helped us to see that actually it's not about the number of people you support, it's about these other things that we're talking about and how to make that meaningful to people outside. So but as the founders, we were quite daunted by this in the beginning. So I think it's always important to be honest about these things. While today everything might look professional and it looked like we really know what we're doing, there was early years where we really struggled with these sort of things because everybody expects you to be able to reel off what is your impact, how does it work, how did you collect that, and it's okay, I think, in the beginning to not be able to figure all of that out if you're just trying to make it sustainable, I think, and that's quite hard in the early stages.
So could you please let us know that how many youth right now that you are help to train them?
Yeah, we have 3 centers. So we have 2 in Bangkok, one that's part of one of our coffee shops, and then one that just opened in October, which is inside an international school, and then one in Phuket too. So between the 3 centers, I think we have a maximum of 35 to 40 trainees at a time, but they are with us for different lengths of time. So in a year, it may be up to 100. But it can be less than that depending on how long their internship process continues for. And then COVID also impacted this as well. As soon as the lockdown started, we saw almost 100% of our graduates lose their jobs and have to then be unemployed, which was, this was a huge blow. This is years of them preparing themselves to get ready for employment, building up the confidence and the self-esteem to do it, and then being part of the first group of people to lose their job. And while we were obviously sympathetic to all organizations who were going through this, it was sad to see that they were in the first group of people to be let go, and in the last group actually for most organizations to be hired back. But this has impacted millions of people across the world. But we know that for the disabled community, this has been huge, because on the one end, you've got all these systems and processes that suddenly became available online that were never online before. So imagine you got to be able to now have a doctor's appointment via Zoom, whereas in the past, this wasn't an option. Or you could access education online, which was limited beforehand. So in the one hand, because something affected the majority of people, overnight, seemingly, we had all this increased access to services that didn't exist before. But at the same time, it became incredibly isolating. So a lot of our trainees are dependent on their families and have to live with them, whilst that's not their want. They want to be independent, and they want to be able to live by themselves. Some of it is culturally. It's not always the way to let your children go live independently here, but also just because some of the families, through all of the weight they've had to carry by having a child who is different through society, I think some families sometimes also not aware of the ability of their child. They try to protect them, and they try to make sure that no harm comes to them, which is absolutely normal. So during COVID, a lot of our trainees were stuck home with their families, but they were so dependent on coming to our centers each day to be with their friends and have interactions and be with people who understand them. So this was quite difficult.
Yeah, talking about the COVID-19 pandemic, as you mentioned earlier, that your business is disrupted by the pandemic, and we would like to know that how do you adapt your business model to address this challenge?
Yeah, so for the training, we did the same as every other education provider, and we made our teaching accessible online. It's not the best platform for some of our community, so we had to team this up with creating physical resources that could be sent home, working closely with families. So some of our families had to become co-job coaches and learn how to do some of the things that we do every day. But this was very powerful to get closer relationships with the families that we work. So for the training center, it existed online, and then as restrictions reduced, then there was a hybrid model of coming in part-time and online part-time, and then slowly, as of January this year, we were back 100% in person. For the cafes, tricky because every F&B business in the world had to suddenly make themselves incredibly appealing online. But we invested the first month of the pandemic redeveloping our website so that it was more user-friendly. So we held on as long as we could, like many organizations, but unfortunately we did have to reduce staff at some point and only have certain branches operating. But we were very it was very interesting to see that we had a huge increase in online sales, and this enabled us to sustain throughout the months where everything was challenging. And for the business service center, this was able to continue because we were able to set up the graduates who were employed with us under this model to do it from home. So there was slight logistical challenges in moving paperwork from place to place, but for the most part, that was able to continue uninterrupted. So we talk about it a lot as reflecting back as we now sort of almost safely out of the well, last year's situation. Maybe there'll be a new situation this year. That we were able to adapt very quickly, and because we do multiple things, this enabled us to actually survive. If we just had only one portion of these offerings, I don't think we'd have been able to. But at the same time, that's why we do what we do. We see ourselves as the overarching support that takes an individual from A all the way to Z. So it doesn't work if you only do the education part, and it doesn't work if you're just the employer. There needs to be this sort of organization that's bridging the gap between the two. And I think this is predominantly why we see the employment statistics that we do. It's not because centers all over the world aren't providing good education. They are, but understandably, employers don't always have the motivation or the skills or the expertise to know how to do it from their side. So for us, it's important that we do both parts in addition to modeling it ourselves. So through having that model from the beginning, ultimately enabled us to survive through something that nobody had ever predicted would happen.
And are there any limitations for like your children to access the online training?
Yeah, there are some of our trainees who were not able to access online. So this really meant that we had to build these relationships with families. So we had to make physical resource instead and deliver those to the house and then work with the families to be able to do it. I think any educator will say online learning is not the best medium for teaching. You miss
agree.
parts, right, of what every component of why we became teachers is not to do it through a screen. But we use lots of educational tools like quizzes and videos and team building activities to keep up morale. We were very concerned about mental health during this time because we start to see that trainees start to not only lose their retained information because they're not having the opportunity to put it into practice each day, but just because they're disconnected from their community. So we have a big line group chat with all of our trainees and coaches in, and this was used outside of training hours as well to just keep that momentum up. A lot of the time we are modeling how to interact, and we're modeling how begin these sort of conversations, because social skills is one area that a lot of our guys find tricky. But by doing these sorts of small things everywhere, it enabled everybody to remain connected. And then, yeah, as I mentioned last month, we saw 100% of our trainees and graduates return to face-to-face. The fingers crossed, you know.
Yeah, that's what is
Out of
better. Yeah. And based on your like internship experience in social enterprise or SE, what are the key benefits and challenges of setting up SE in Thailand?
Yeah, so I'm very, you know, I have to be very honest that without my Thai co-founder, that this isn't something that would have been possible for us. I'm sure you guys are aware that this sort of thing involves thousands of pieces of paper and stamps and signing and documents and accessing everything in Thai. So there's two types of social enterprise registration. One type enables you to pay dividends, and in turn, you don't really get any benefits. We went for the other option, which is the no profit sharing type. So that makes us corporate income tax exempt, which is helpful once you're an organization over a certain size. I would say for smaller social enterprises, that's probably not the reason to do it. You only pay CIT after a certain level of revenue anyway. But here we find that one of the big benefits is being part of organizations like Social Enterprise Thailand. This is where the support and the networking really makes what you do each day feasible, and they are acting as a liaison between government and the Office of Social Enterprise and revenue departments and all of these other ministries to share information with us. Because, and this fall under the challenges, the bylaws and benefits are not complete. So I don't know how much people are aware of the status of social enterprise that used to be in place many years ago, and then it was stopped because there was quite a high level of corruption and people who were getting the status but not doing anything that was remotely impactful. And then it started again almost 2 years ago now, but the bylaws and benefits haven't been fully completed. So in the first year of being a social enterprise, we sort of knew that we were one, and we had been acting as one since we were founded, but little changed because everybody was still figuring out what it was going to look like. Now we start to see things like government contract priority is being discussed. So we should we have a service that the government needed to get priority when contracts are tendered for. And this helps the government to achieve their SDGs and their other sustainability goals too. In general, we still find there's limited awareness of social enterprise. As I mentioned in the beginning, we still get asked why we're not a foundation. So you sort of get stuck in the middle where you're not a charity, so people don't want to help, which is fine because we're not asking for financial help. But when we do need funds for growth, one, there is a lack of social impact investors, and two, the ones that do label themselves as social impact investors are looking for the same sort of return as you would from a typical business. I would, to be completely transparent, all the conversations we've had with social impact investors have been very focused on the finance and not very focused on the impact. So this is still an emerging field, I think, where you see funds and VCs who are saying that they're social impact investors, but in reality, they're just typical investors. And that there is a lack of this type of investor in Thailand in particular. We see more in Singapore and Hong Kong, but very few here. So I think for smaller social enterprises, it's quite difficult in the first couple of years to scale and grow because there's just a real limited access to any funding. Last year, the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, they did something around access to loans for social projects. But again, there is a return on these things and so on, which it's okay because actually I really believe social enterprises should run like typical businesses, but there has to be a middle ground somewhere where there's still access to funds for growth if you need it, but you're looked at as an organization that does more than just focus on maximizing profit. this is where the gap is, I think, at the moment.
Yeah, but I believe that there are like many people outside that they would like to start a social enterprise business in Thailand, but they don't know how, and also about the governmental agency support, in particular laws on any regulations. Yeah, and in your perspective, according to the challenges that you just mentioned, who should be the involved to support social enterprise in Thailand to address these challenges or close the gap?
For me, I'm a big believer in partnerships. I think partnerships enable two sides to get desired goals, and at least for our work, I find that partnership should exist with corporate partners. I think we see an emergence today of big and small, actually SMEs as well, who want to move away from traditional CSR of just, writing the check, handing it over to a foundation, turning up for pictures and then going back and calling that CSR. We see now more organizations wanting to do something that is a little bit more impactful. And I think social enterprise provide a vehicle to do that. So I think both sides have goals they want to meet. So for STEPS, for example, we want to create employment opportunities and sustainable employment. Companies want to be inclusive employers, and they want to use it to meet SDGs, and they want to have partnerships that enable them to some companies want to do it for the true reason because they feel like it's the right thing to do, and others understandably want to use it for marketing and PR, which is also fine. If we can market to our customers that we do these sorts of things, we know that we can increase our engagement. So I have no problem with this sort of arrangement, but I think this is where companies can help to fill in the gaps from government, and to help this move forward more quickly is by reaching out to make these sorts of partnerships. But what would be helpful would be to have an intermediary that help to vet social projects and help connect them with corporates who are looking for that sort of partnership. And there's an organization called Change Fusion that does this in some ways, but I think it just needs to be excelled a little bit more.
And the last question from us, do you have any recommendations or suggestions for newcomers who would like to join in SE journey?
Don't open a coffee shop. No, I could. I think I meet lots of social entrepreneurs who want to do something because they want to do something good, and I think that's a great reason. But I think it's important to try and, as hard as it can be, is to think 5 to 10 years down the line. This is something that I wish that I had done, so that we'd put more effort in the early stages into building some of those foundation blocks, which then you later on realize you need, and it would have been easier to do it from the beginning. But because of these challenges, because there's lack of access to funding and there's lack of awareness, in the early stages, it's very dependent on the co-founders or the founder itself. You often don't have teams the way that a foundation might, that's got access to different types of funding. And you need to wear all the hats. So you can have a meeting and you're the CFO, then you're the marketing manager, then you're running the coffee shop and you're changing recipes, and you're also the trainer, and you're also managing the training center. And this can be difficult. So I think try to think beyond today of like the mission that you've got, and reach out and try and make those partnerships in your early stages, because I think it helps you to grow in a more sustainable way. For us, we grew probably too quickly in our first 2 or 3 years because we took opportunities that came to us. And on reflection, we probably should have paused and waited for different timing to come, but you get so energized by other people's support sometimes that you want to go with it. So I think be clear about what you want to do and when, and set some timelines around that, and try not to steer from it too much.
Okay, thank you. We got some question from the Facebook Live and also from the chat box. The first question is that you have also showed like the number of potential revenue generating opportunity. So what % of your operating costs are covered by this activity, and is there potential to scale up in order to cover more?
Sorry, what percentage of our revenue is able to cover our operations?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, our operations are almost fully covered by the revenue that we generate from our operations. In periods where we've grown, such as we want to open a new branch, we have done fundraising activities for that, but for the day-in day-out operations, they are covered by the overheads that are covered by the daily operations. And what was the second part of the question? Sorry.
The first question. Okay, for the second question, from Michelle, she would like to know that when you first start your business, how many students did you have, and what was your initial capital approximately? How long did it take you to be profitable, to be self-sustainable?
We started with 4 trainees. We just had 4 in the beginning, but we knew that that was the number we needed to cover overheads. So we had 2 coffee shops actually from the beginning, and we had 4 students, 4 trainees. And within 18 months, we were break even, and within 2 years, we were profitable.
So it's not much wrong, just 2 years, right?
Yeah, we did this quite quickly. I didn't realize at the time that this is quite good. I hadn't run a business before, let alone a social business, so it was news to us. But we were very lucky to. One thing that's quite actually, this is maybe good advice for people thinking of starting a social business is we found there's organizations like Trust Law that provide free access to legal advice for charities and social projects. But this also kind of exists in its own format for other sort of services. So when we're looking for somebody to help us with finance, you find people have rolling fees depending on the organization. So by reaching out to ask people, you will often find very senior people who are very experienced, willing to give time to you at a reduced cost, because it also it makes them feel good. They get to use their expertise to help smaller companies. So that's something we did a lot in the beginning through networking. I think in the first 2 years, I went everywhere and spoke to everybody about steps that I could find. And then we often got people willing to contribute time on areas like finance and marketing that are a bit harder. So these contributed to us being able to become sustainable quite quickly.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So could we could you mind that if we would like to share your slide in public?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course I will.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I think we have no question from the audience, or if any audience would like to ask more, please send your question to our box. Yeah. Okay, so we have another question from Michelle. She asked that about what is the best advice if she would like to start a SE.
I would absolutely reach out to Social Enterprise Thailand. I noticed I just went on their website recently. Now everything is also in English, which was great for me because previously everything was in Thai. Lots of their team are bilingual as well, but there's so many resources listed on there. They're a good first point of contact if you're interested to begin. And then they can help you through all of the stages of applying to the Office of Social Enterprise and getting your status. One important point, actually, you have to have been a limited company for 1 year before you can convert to being a social enterprise. So you need to have done that beforehand before you can begin. But hopefully this will change as the bylaws become more complete.
Okay, thank you. So, all right. If there is no more question from audience, we would like to say thank you so much, Max, for joining us today your business social enterprise is very inspirational and beneficial to everyone who would like to start setting up their social enterprise in Thailand. And thank you so much for all the audience. Thank you.